My car broke down right in the middle of the highway, and when I finally got home, I discovered my husband had drained all our savings with his mistress. But that betrayal was only the beginning of the crueler nightmare I never imagined living. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask you to leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep letting this out. The midday sun in Dallas, Texas was hitting my face when the engine of my old Toyota Camry began to make that sound all women my age know, the sound of something breaking for good. I pulled over to the shoulder of Highway 67, my hands shaking as I turned the key again and again. Nothing, just the silence of the dead engine and the distant hum of traffic speeding by. Indifferent to my desperation, I was wearing my navy blue dress, the one Robert had given me for our 30th anniversary. The long sleeves stuck to my sweaty arms, and the high collar choked me, a constant reminder of all the years I'd spent covering up, hiding, trying to be the perfect wife he deserved. My low-heeled shoes, the only ones that didn't hurt my feet after so many hours standing, cooking, cleaning, serving, sank into the gravel of the shoulder as I walked around the car, searching for a solution that didn't exist. The smell of burnt oil mingled with the sweet aroma of the crepe myrtle flowers that grew wild along the road. It was ironic. Even in my most desperate moment, North Texas was still beautiful, indifferent to my suffering. The distant hills rose majestically under the blue sky, as if to remind me the world would keep spinning no matter that my life was crumbling into pieces. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. The cracked screen reflected my divided face, as if the universe were trying to tell me something I couldn't yet understand. I dialed Robert's number. Once, twice, 3 times. Each call was lost in the void, each dial tone another stab in the chest. "Robert, please answer," I whispered to the wind, as if my pleas could cross the distance and touch what was left of his heart. But he didn't answer. Nor did my children. David was busy with his finance job downtown, managing million-dollar investments for clients who probably earned in a day what I saw in a year. Allison was shopping at the Galleria, spending the equivalent of my entire monthly allowance in one afternoon. And Chloe, my youngest, my hope, was in Europe, finding herself, with the money I'd saved by selling my jewelry, piece by piece, to pay for her 3-month trip. The sun burned the back of my neck as I walked 2.5 miles to the nearest gas station. Each step was torture. My feet swelled in my shoes, thirst parched my throat, and the weight of the years piled onto my back like stones in an invisible satchel. But what hurt most wasn't the physical exhaustion. It was the growing certainty that in this moment of crisis, no one was thinking of me. An older man, a cargo truck driver, took pity on me and offered me a ride back home. During the drive, he told me about his wife, who had died the year before after 40 years of marriage. She was my true partner, ma'am. Not like now, where the young folks marry and split over any little thing. We knew what it meant to build something together, didn't we? I nodded, but his words burned inside me. Build something together? What had Robert and I built, besides a perfect facade that fooled everyone but ourselves? When we arrived at my neighborhood, Lakeside Manor, the 2-story houses with perfectly manicured lawns suddenly seemed strange, as if they belonged to someone else's life. The truck driver helped me down, and I thanked him with a smile that hurt down to my bones. The front door of my house was ajar. That should have alerted me. In 32 years of marriage, Robert never left the door unlocked. He was obsessive about security, about control, about keeping everything in its perfect place. But my mind, exhausted from the heat and the walk, just wanted to get home, take off my shoes, and maybe receive even a tiny bit of compassion from my husband. I pushed the door and walked in. The silence hit me like a slap. It wasn't the normal silence of an empty house, but something denser, more final. It was the silence of spaces that have been systematically emptied of purpose, with the intention of leaving no trace. My feet were cemented to the floor of the foyer, the wooden console where we always left the keys. The mail, the small things of everyday life, was gone. The bare walls showed clear outlines where our family photographs had hung for years. David's wedding, my grandkids' baptism, our trip to San Diego. Christmases at my parents' house. The sound of my heels echoed hollowly on the marble floor as I moved toward the living room. Every step was a confirmation of what my mind refused to accept. The camel leather sofa we'd paid for in installments. The glass coffee table where Robert read the paper every morning. The bookcase where I kept my romantic novels and he kept his books on finance and the stock market. All gone. It was as if an invisible tornado had passed through my house, taking only the things of value, leaving only the bare walls and the echo of 32 years of shared life. On the dining room table, which had also been stripped of its tablecloth and decorations, I found a folded sheet of paper. My name was written in Robert's angular script, that handwriting that I once thought elegant and now looked cold as a knife. With hands I could no longer control, I unfolded the letter. Eleanor, you took the best years of my life. Now I'm taking what's left. Don't look for me. Don't follow me. What we had died a long time ago, but I didn't have the courage to bury it until now. Robert. I read the words once, twice, 3 times. As if the repetition could change their meaning, as if my brain could find a different interpretation for this death sentence I had just received. You took the best years of my life. Me? I took his best years? What had I done, besides loving him, caring for him, cooking for him, washing his clothes, raising his children, accompanying him every step of his career, celebrating every one of his successes as if they were my own, and comforting every one of his defeats as if I were the one who had failed? Tears began to fall onto the paper, blurring the ink of his cruel words. But they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of humiliation, of the terrible realization that everything I had considered my life was, in reality, a carefully constructed lie. I ran to our bedroom, though I already knew what I would find. Robert's closet was completely empty. His designer suits, his Italian shoes, his Swiss watches, all vanished. He had even taken the hangers, as if to ensure not even the ghost of his presence remained. But what finally broke me was not his absence. It was finding, forgotten in a corner of the closet, a bottle of perfume that wasn't mine, an expensive scent, the kind sold in the Galleria boutiques, with a floral, youthful aroma that I could never afford on my retirement stipend. Another woman's perfume in my bedroom, in my bed, in my life. I sank to the floor, clutching the bottle as if it were evidence of a crime. And it was. It was evidence of the world's oldest crime, that of a man who had decided his wife was no longer suitable for the life he wanted to live, that she was no longer young, beautiful, or interesting enough to accompany him in his new version of himself. There, sitting on the cold marble floor of my own room, with a blue dress sticking to my sweaty body and a strange perfume bottle in my hands, I began to understand that my life, as I knew it, was over for good. And the worst part was, I hadn't even begun to discover how deep the betrayal awaiting me went. For 3 days, I lived like a ghost in my own house, walking between the bare walls while trying to process the magnitude of what Robert had done. Every room screamed his absence, but also whispered secrets I had been too blind to see all these years. On the 4th day, I decided to check our bank accounts. I sat down in front of the old computer he had left behind, probably because it had no value for his new life as a successful bachelor. My fingers trembled as I entered the passwords I knew by heart: birthdays, anniversaries, our children's names. The first account showed a balance of $0. The second, $0. The third, where we kept our emergency savings, also 0. But what devastated me was not the numbers in red. It was discovering the date of the last transactions. All the money had been withdrawn 3 months before my car broke down. 3 months. 90 days during which Robert had eaten breakfast with me, slept beside me, and replied, "I love you too," when I told him before bed. 90 days during which he had been planning his escape while I continued to live under the illusion that we were a couple, that after 32 years we had built something solid, unbreakable. The transfers showed destinations I didn't recognize, accounts in the name of a certain Tiffany Miller. Every move was a knife twist. $50,000 here, $80,000 there. The retirement fund I had built dollar by dollar over 20 years working as a secretary at the neighborhood elementary school. Gone. The savings for the medical treatment I would need when my diabetes worsened. Stolen. The money we had earmarked for fixing the roof before the rainy season, in the hands of a stranger. I searched for the name on Facebook, because pain has that perverse characteristic. It always wants to know more, always needs to confirm what it already suspects. Tiffany Miller appeared immediately in the results. A woman in her mid-30s, slender, blonde, with that artificial smile characteristic of women who know they are beautiful and use it as currency. Her recent photos showed trips to a luxury resort in the Florida Keys, dinners at expensive uptown Dallas restaurants, designer bags that cost more than I earned in 6 months. And in several of those photos, holding hands or embracing my husband, my life was crumbling in real time. The most recent album was titled New Life, New Dreams. The photos had been taken in a high-end resort in the Caribbean, where the rooms cost what many American families don't see in a whole year. Robert looked tanned, relaxed, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. He wore a white linen shirt I didn't recognize, designer pants he had never worn with me, and a gold watch that definitely wasn't in his collection the last time I checked his jewelry box. But what hurt most was one particular photo, the two of them toasting with champagne flutes, and in the background a sign that read, "Congratulations on your engagement." She wore a ring that sparkled so much I could see the glint of the diamonds even in the photo. My husband, my life partner, the father of my children, had gotten engaged to another woman while I was still wearing my simple gold wedding band, the same one we bought on installment at a downtown jewelry store 32 years ago, when we were young and poor and believed that love was enough to build a life together. Tears fell onto the keyboard as I continued to review the photos like a digital masochist. There were images of them in restaurants where I had never set foot, in luxury stores where a single garment cost what I spent on clothes all year, in hotels that appeared in travel magazines as destinations for millionaires. And then I found something that chilled my blood. Family photos. David, Allison, and Chloe appeared with them on several occasions. A Christmas dinner at an elegant restaurant. A weekend in Napa Valley, touring exclusive wineries. A birthday celebration on a terrace overlooking the city. My children knew Tiffany. My children had shared meals, laughs, and celebrations with the woman who had destroyed my marriage. And not only did they know her, they had accepted her, included her, legitimized her while I stayed home, waiting for them to return from their work commitments or their outings with friends. The phone suddenly rang, startling me. Chloe's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment my heart raced with the absurd hope that she was calling to explain everything, to tell me it had been a terrible misunderstanding, that she knew nothing of her father's betrayal. "Mom? How are you? I've been thinking about you a lot." Her voice sounded sweet, concerned, like the little girl she had been when she got hurt playing and ran to my arms for comfort. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that my youngest daughter still loved me, that she was still my ally in a world that had become incomprehensible. "Chloe, honey, I need to talk to you about your dad. He left and—" "Oh, Mom, I know. Dad told me you two decided to separate. He says you'd been talking about it for a while, that it was mutual." "Mutual? Chloe, I didn't know anything. He took all the money, emptied the accounts, left without telling me." "Mom, don't be dramatic. Dad says you perfectly well knew things weren't working out between you. He says you agreed to an equitable division of assets and that you're exaggerating because you're afraid to live alone." Every word from Chloe was like a hammer pounding the nails into the coffin of my sanity. My own daughter had chosen to believe the version of events that suited her, the version that allowed her to continue enjoying her father's financial generosity without having to deal with the moral discomfort of knowing he had betrayed her mother. "Chloe, he's with another woman. Her name is Tiffany. They're engaged. I've seen the photos. Mom, that's not our business. Adults have the right to start new lives. You should think about going out, meeting people, not just staying there lamenting." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, but I no longer truly heard what Chloe was saying. Her voice had become a distant buzz, like the noise of an annoying mosquito fluttering around your head that you can no longer swat because you've lost the strength in your arms. When I hung up, I called David. The conversation was even worse, because he didn't even pretend surprise or compassion. "Mom, I have a really important meeting right now. Can we talk later? David, your father abandoned me. He took all the money. I need you to come over. Mom, divorces are complicated. There are probably legal things to resolve. I suggest you hire an attorney. I have to hang up. My clients are waiting. My clients. As if his stock market investments were more important than his mother's broken heart. As if the bitcoins and cryptocurrencies he managed for millionaire families were more urgent than the woman who had sacrificed her own dreams so he could get a university degree. The last call was to Allison, though I already knew it would be futile. She was at the salon, getting her weekly facial, spending in one afternoon what I needed to buy medicine for a month. Mom, my nails are wet. I can't talk. But look, Dad told me everything. He says you'll both be better off separate, that you had lost your emotional connection. He says it's best for everyone. Allison, he's been with another woman for months. He spent our savings on her. Don't you think that's wrong? Oh, Mom, don't be so old-fashioned. Men need to feel inspired. They need passion. Maybe if you had made more effort to stay attractive, to be interested in the things he likes, this wouldn't have happened. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my empty house, trying to process what I had just heard. My daughter, the girl I had taught to walk, the one I had comforted during her first heartbreak, the one I had financially supported during her divorce the previous year, was telling me that her father's infidelity was my fault for not being attractive or interesting enough. It was as if my whole world had turned upside down. The values I had tried to instill in my children, the importance of loyalty, respect, unconditional love, had been replaced by a cold, transactional logic where people were disposable when they stopped being useful or attractive. That night, alone in my matrimonial bed that now seemed like an ocean of solitude, I realized I hadn't just lost my husband. I had lost my entire family. My children had chosen the side of comfort, money, and apparent success, and I was left on the side of truth, dignity, and absolute loneliness. The phone rang one more time before I could fall asleep. An unknown number. I answered with the absurd hope that it was Robert, calling to apologize, to tell me it had all been a terrible mistake. It was a recorded message from the bank, informing me that my credit card had been canceled due to non-payment. Another bill Robert had stopped paying before leaving. Another financial responsibility that now fell onto my shoulders as a retired woman with a pension barely covering basic expenses. I curled up under the sheets that smelled of my cheap perfume and the loneliness that had become my only companion, while outside the city of Dallas continued its nighttime rhythm, indifferent to the fact that in a house in Lakeside Manor, a 64-year-old woman had just discovered that everything she had believed about love, family, and loyalty had been a carefully constructed lie for over 3 decades. 2 weeks after the abandonment, when I thought I had already hit rock bottom, life showed me there is always a deeper basement you can fall into. The doorbell rang one Tuesday morning while I was trying to eat scrambled eggs that tasted like cardboard because the tears had eliminated my ability to perceive any flavor that wasn't bitter. It was a messenger in a blue uniform, with a thick folder in his hands, and that professionally neutral expression of someone who delivers bad news for a living. The envelope bore the letterhead of the law firm Browning, Carmichael and Associates, one of the most prestigious firms in Dallas, where the attorneys charged by the hour what I earned in a month. Mrs. Eleanor Morales Robbins? I nodded, though pronouncing my full name hurt. Morales Robbins. I had carried Robert's last name with so much pride for 32 years, as if it were a badge that identified me as a complete woman, a woman who had achieved what was expected of her. Marriage, children, a family. Now that name felt like a brand on my skin, reminding me that I had been the property of someone who had discarded me. The documents in the envelope were the divorce petition, 30 pages of legal terminology that boiled down to one devastating sentence. Robert Robbins was requesting the dissolution of the marriage due to incompatibility of temperament and irreconcilable differences, and he alleged that I had been emotionally negligent during the last years of the relationship. Emotionally negligent. Me, who had spent sleepless nights caring for him when he had pneumonia. Me, who had sold my graduation ring to help pay for his continuing education courses in international finance. Me, who had faked orgasms for years not to hurt his ego when age and stress affected our intimacy. Me, who had celebrated every one of his professional successes as if they were my own, who had comforted every one of his career frustrations as if it were my responsibility to heal him. But what devastated me most were not the false accusations. It was the list of assets he claimed as his own. The house where we lived, which was in both our names, but whose down payment I had fully paid with my parents' inheritance. The new car we had bought the previous year, financed with my savings because his credit history had some issues he never fully explained. He even claimed half the value of my jewelry, the few pieces I had left after selling the rest to keep the family economy afloat during his periods of unemployment. The document included a proposal for spousal support, $750 a month. $750. What he spent on a single dinner with Tiffany at any of the elegant restaurants they frequented. According to the photos, I kept torturing myself by reviewing on social media like a pain addict. That afternoon, my legs carried me to the park where I used to walk on Sunday mornings, when I still believed I had a normal life. I sat on the same bench where just a month ago I had been feeding pigeons and watching young families play with their children, feeling a sweet nostalgia for the days when David, Allison, and Chloe were little, and I was the center of their universe. Now the families seemed like aliens to me. Fathers pushing swings, mothers wiping runny noses, grandparents carrying sleeping grandchildren. All of it belonged to a world from which I had been expelled without notice. It was like observing life through the glass of a storefront, knowing I could never be part of that domestic normality I had once taken for granted again. An older woman sat next to me, a lady with white hair and wrinkled hands carrying a bag of crumbs to feed the birds. I vaguely recognized her from the neighborhood, but we had never exchanged more than cordial greetings. "Are you all right, dear? You look very sad lately." Her voice had that maternal warmth that made me completely break down. I told her everything, right there, on that park bench, spilling 32 years of life to a stranger who listened with the infinite patience of someone who had lived long enough to know that human pain deserves respect, no matter the circumstances that caused it. "Oh, honey, the men nowadays are not like they used to be. Before, when you married, it was for life, through thick and thin. Now they want to change wives like changing a cell phone. When the model looks old, they toss it and buy a new one." Her words comforted and broke my heart at the same time. They comforted me because someone, finally, understood that I wasn't the villain in this story. They broke my heart because they confirmed that the world I knew, where marriages lasted until death separated them, had been replaced by a reality where people were disposable when they ceased to be convenient. "And your children? Don't they support you?" The question wrung fresh tears from me. I explained the phone calls, the way they had taken their father's side, how they had made me feel that I was to blame for the destruction of our family for not having been an interesting or attractive enough wife. "Those aren't children, honey. Those are defective products. You gave them life, you raised them, you loved them. And now that you need them, they abandon you for money. That's not family. That's a business deal." I arrived home as the sun was setting, painting the Dallas sky with those reds and oranges that once seemed beautiful to me and now reminded me of spilled blood. The empty house greeted me with its usual silence, but this time there was something different. A smell I didn't recognize. I checked all the rooms until I found the source. In the master bathroom, the medicine cabinet was open, and several bottles of medication were gone. My diabetes pills, my blood pressure meds, even the cough syrup I had bought the week before. All stolen. At first, I thought they had been common burglars, but when I checked more carefully, I realized they had only taken the medicines. Nothing else. The few valuables left in the house were still in place. My wristwatch on the nightstand, the silver earrings my mother had given me, the small bedroom TV, only the medicine. As if someone had wanted to send me a very specific message. Not only did we abandon you, but we also want you to get sick, to suffer, to realize how vulnerable you are without us. I couldn't sleep that night, not only because of the worry of how I would buy new medicines with my ridiculous pension, but because I finally understood the depth of the cruelty of which the people I had once considered my family were capable. It wasn't enough to abandon me emotionally. They also wanted to ensure my physical deterioration would be faster, more painful. The next day, While waiting at the local community clinic pharmacy to explain to the doctor that I needed new prescriptions because my medications had been stolen, I received a WhatsApp message from David. "Mom, Dad says you're inventing drama to get attention. He says he never took any of your medicine and that you probably lost it because you're careless. He also says if you keep telling lies about him, he'll have to take legal action to protect his reputation. I hope you reflect on your attitude." I read the message 5 times, trying to process that my eldest son, the child who had come out of my womb after 18 hours of labor, the baby I had breastfed for 8 months, the rebellious teenager I had defended when he got into trouble at school, was now threatening me with legal action if I dared to tell the truth about what his father had done to me. The other people in the waiting room looked at me with disguised curiosity. A woman my age asked if I felt unwell, because, she said, I had suddenly turned very pale. "No, ma'am. It's just that I just discovered my children hate me more than I thought." She offered me a mint from her purse and said, "Oh, honey, the children these days are so ungrateful. You give them everything and they value nothing. But God sees everything, and everything is paid for in this life or the next." I don't know if I believe in divine justice, but at that moment I needed to cling to the idea that somewhere in the universe there was a force that kept the accounts of good and evil, that registered every betrayal, every abandonment, every act of cruelty disguised as normality. That afternoon, after getting new prescriptions and spending money on medicine that I needed for food, I decided to check my phone. I had 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. When I called back, a young professional female voice answered, "Mrs. Robbins? This is Carmen Suarez from Browning, Carmichael and Associates. We need to schedule an urgent appointment. There are some matters related to your divorce proceedings that require immediate attention." My stomach dropped. Every time someone had told me, "I regret having to tell you," in recent months, my life had worsened exponentially. "Can you tell me what it's about?" "We prefer to discuss the details in person, ma'am. Could you come in tomorrow at 10 in the morning?" I hung up the phone with trembling hands. I didn't know what else could go wrong, but I was sure the universe hadn't finished punishing me. Each day brought a new humiliation, a new betrayal, a new way of making me feel that my life had been a mistake that was finally being corrected by forces more powerful than my will to keep existing. I poured myself a glass of water and took my freshly bought pills, wondering if it was worth continuing to care for a body that inhabited a life that no longer belonged to me, in a world that had decided women like me no longer had a place in it. The appointment at Browning, Carmichael and Associates awaited me like an appointment with the executioner. I put on my only decent dress, the black one I had worn for my mother's funeral, because it seemed appropriate for what I suspected would be the official death of everything that remained of my former life. The glass and steel building rose in the financial district of Dallas like a monument to power and money, reminding me with every floor I ascended in the elevator that I did not belong in that world of expensive suits and decisions worth millions. Carmen Suarez turned out to be a young, elegant woman, with that professional confidence that only comes from being born on the right side of the economy. Her office had a panoramic view of the city, and while she organized the documents on her mahogany desk, I could see through the glass the life unfolding below. Human ants rushing to jobs that allowed them to live in decent apartments, buy food without checking prices, sleep peacefully knowing they would still have a place in the world tomorrow. "Mrs. Robbins, I regret having to give you this information, but there are additional complications in your divorce proceedings that did not appear in the initial documents." My stomach clenched. Every time someone had said, "I regret having to tell you," in recent months, my life had worsened exponentially. "Your husband has filed a countersuit. He alleges that you have been publicly defaming him, damaging his professional and personal reputation. He is seeking a restraining order that would prohibit you from approaching him, his place of work, or making public statements about your relationship. But I haven't talked to anyone except that lady in the park. He is also suing for damages. He claims that your lies and fabrications have negatively affected his business opportunities. He is requesting compensation of $200,000. $200,000. A figure that represented more money than I had ever seen put together in my life, a sum I would have to earn by working day and night for years just to get close to paying it. Robert knew perfectly well it was an impossible amount for me. He knew this wasn't a real lawsuit, but a form of legalized torture. How can he sue me? He's the one who left, who emptied the accounts, who— Mrs. Robbins. In civil law, what matters is what can be proven. Your husband has documents to support his claims. Affidavits signed by people who claim to have heard you make defamatory statements. He even has recordings. Recordings? Of what? Carmen pressed a button on her computer, and suddenly I heard my own voice coming from the speakers, distorted but recognizable. It was a phone conversation with Chloe when I had told her about Tiffany and the empty accounts. But the recording only featured my side of the conversation, edited in such a way that it seemed like I was inventing stories, exaggerating, creating drama where there was none. My own daughter recorded me, I murmured, feeling something definitively break in my chest. Ma'am, I must also inform you that your children have signed sworn declarations supporting their father's version of events. They claim that you have had emotional problems for years, that you have displayed erratic behavior, and that the accusations against your father are the result of age-related mental deterioration. Age-related mental deterioration. My own children had signed legal documents declaring that I was crazy, that my claims of abandonment and betrayal were symptoms of senile dementia. They had turned my pain into pathology, my truth into a symptom of mental illness. I have to ask you something very important, Mrs. Robbins. Do you have the resources to hire legal representation? Because this case is going to require an aggressive defense, and the fees— I don't have money for lawyers. I barely have money for medicine. Carmen nodded with that professional pity I had learned to recognize in recent months. It was the look given to someone who had lost before the fight even began. Someone so obviously defeated that even their enemies felt sorry for them. There is the option of a public defender, but I'll be honest with you. In cases like this, where the opposing party has significant resources and top-tier legal representation, the chances of success are very limited. I left the building feeling like I was walking in a nightmare. The streets of Dallas looked different, as if I were observing the city through the fogged glass of my defeat. The people walking on the sidewalks seemed to have purpose, destination, future. I was a ghost wandering among the living, a woman who had ceased to exist legally, socially, and familially. On the bus ride home, a young woman offered me her seat when she saw me swaying. Her kindness made me cry again, because it reminded me that somewhere in the world there were still people capable of gratuitous goodness, of compassion toward strangers. But it also made me feel profoundly humiliated. I had become one of those older women who elicit pity on public transport, a living reminder of what can happen to anyone when life decides to be cruel. That night, as I tried to digest a cheap ham sandwich that tasted like cardboard, the phone rang. It was Allison, and for a moment my heart raced, thinking maybe she had reflected. Maybe she was calling to apologize for signing documents declaring that I was crazy. Mom, we need to talk. David and Chloe and I are coming over tomorrow. There are things to discuss. Her voice sounded cold, corporate, as if she were scheduling a business meeting instead of talking to the woman who had given her life. Are you coming to support me? To help me with the lawyers? We're coming to talk about your future, Mom, about what's best for everyone. She hung up without saying goodbye, and I was left holding the phone, knowing that whatever my children had planned for me was not going to be in my benefit. All night I heard noises that didn't exist, imagined conversations in empty rooms, felt presences that weren't there. For the first time in my life, I understood how someone could truly go insane, when reality becomes so unbearable that the brain prefers to create an alternative, even if it is false. The morning arrived gray and cloudy, with that sticky humidity typical of Dallas before the storm season. My children arrived promptly at 10, dressed like executives coming to close an important deal. David carried a leather briefcase, Allison had a tablet, and Chloe had that expression of determination she had inherited from her father. They sat in the empty living room like strangers visiting an unknown house. There were no hugs, no, "How are you, Mom?" Not even the basic courtesy of asking if I wanted them to bring coffee or anything to eat. They had come to do business, and I was the defective product that needed to be liquidated. "Mom, the three of us have been talking, And we think the best thing for you is to accept Dad's proposal without resistance, David began, speaking as if he were an executive presenting a corporate restructuring plan. Your father's proposal? Are you referring to the $750 a month and the $200,000 lawsuit? Mom, don't be dramatic. Dad is being generous considering the circumstances. He could have left you with nothing. Chloe leaned forward with that condescending expression she used when explaining something to people she considered less intelligent. Look, Mom, the reality is you have no way to win this legal battle. Dad has resources. He has expensive lawyers. He has witnesses. What do you have? A miserable pension and a house you're going to have to sell to pay debts. We've also thought about your well-being, Allison added, checking something on her tablet as if consulting a financial report. We've researched some senior living communities. They're dignified places with medical care, recreational activities. Communities? You want to put me in a home? It's not a home, Mom. They are communities for seniors who need additional support, David corrected. Additional support for what? I'm not sick. I'm not crazy. I don't need to be looked after like a child. Mom, let's be realistic, Chloe sighed. You're 64, diabetic. You have high blood pressure. You don't have enough income to maintain this big house. And frankly, your behavior lately has been concerning. My pain was concerning. My indignation at being betrayed was concerning. My refusal to accept being robbed and abandoned was anomalous behavior that required medical intervention. We've found a very nice place in a quiet community outside of Fort Worth, Allison continued. It has gardens, a library. They even organize dances on the weekends. You would be much better off there than alone in this huge house. And the sale of the house would give you initial capital to cover the residence expenses, David added. We could manage that money for you, to make sure it lasts. There was the truth. They wanted the house. They wanted to control the sale money. They wanted to disappear me into a residence where I couldn't cause problems, where I couldn't tell my side of the story, where I would become another elderly woman who had been carefully relocated by concerned family members. And if I refuse? The three exchanged meaningful glances. Mom, Dad has medical documents that suggest you are no longer capable of making rational decisions for yourself, Chloe said in a soft voice, as if consoling a child. If necessary, he can initiate a guardianship petition. It would be much easier for everyone if you cooperate voluntarily. Guardianship. The word sounded like a death sentence. They would legally declare me incompetent, someone who needed others to make decisions for her. And those others would be them, my children, who had decided I was an inconvenience that needed to be efficiently managed. I sat in that empty room, surrounded by the three human beings who had come out of my body, who had nursed at my breasts, who had learned to walk by holding my hands, and I understood that I was completely alone in the world. Not only had they abandoned me, they were erasing me, eliminating my existence as an autonomous person to turn me into an administrative problem that required a solution. After my children left, after hearing their plans to erase me from the world as if I were a corrupted file on a computer, I sat in that empty room for hours. I wasn't crying. I had no tears left. It was as if something fundamental had changed inside me, as if the last thread connecting me to the submissive, obedient woman I had been for 64 years had been severed forever. For the first time in months, I didn't feel pain. I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Pure, crystalline, beautiful rage. Not the self-pitying sadness that had consumed me since Robert's abandonment, but a clean fury that filled me with energy as if I had connected my veins to a power source. I got up from that chair and walked to the foyer mirror, the only one Robert had left because it had a crack in the corner that made it imperfect for his new life of success. I looked myself in the eyes, truly looked, for the first time in years. I saw a 64-year-old woman with wrinkles around her eyes, with gray hair I had stopped dyeing for lack of money, with skin spotted by the sun and age. But I also saw something else. I saw a survivor. Eleanor Robbins, I said to my reflection. These bastards messed with the wrong woman. It was the first time in my life I had said a curse word aloud, and it felt liberating, as if I had broken an invisible chain that had kept me prisoner of correctness and decorum my entire existence. I couldn't sleep that night, but not because of anxiety or depression. I couldn't sleep because my mind was working at full speed, planning, calculating, remembering details I had overlooked for years. Details that now, seen from my new perspective as a betrayed but not defeated woman, took on a completely different meaning. I remembered Robert's phone conversations in recent months, when he would go out to the backyard to talk privately, saying they were work matters. I remembered how he had insisted I sign several documents to update our investments, papers I had signed without reading because I trusted him blindly. I remembered the times he had arrived home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, and how I had chosen to believe his explanations about work meetings that ran late into the night. But most of all, I remembered something I had completely forgotten. 2 years ago, my sister Claire had told me she saw Robert at an elegant restaurant downtown with a young woman, very affectionate, kissing like newlyweds. I had yelled at her, told her she was inventing gossip to damage my marriage, and since then we had barely spoken. Claire, my younger sister, the only blood family I had left alive, whom I had rejected to defend a man who was already planning to abandon me. The phone rang 6 times before she answered, and her voice sounded cautious, as if she feared I would yell at her again. "Eleanor, are you okay? It's 2 in the morning. Claire, I need to apologize, and I need to ask for your help." I told her everything. Every detail of the last few months, every betrayal, every humiliation, every plan my children had to make me disappear. Claire listened in silence, and when I finished, her first comment surprised me. "I told you 2 years ago, sister. I told you that man was cheating on you and you yelled at me like I was your enemy. But you know what? I don't care about being right. What matters to me is that you're ready to do something about it now." Claire was 3 years younger than me, but she had always been the stronger, the more independent one. She had divorced her first husband at 30, when divorce was still a scandal in our families, and had raised her 2 daughters alone while working as an accountant. She had never remarried, saying she had learned her lesson about depending on a man to be happy. "Come to my house early tomorrow," she told me. "I have some ideas, and I know someone who can help us." The next morning, I took the bus to Claire's house for the first time in 2 years. During the ride, I observed the city with new eyes. Dallas was still beautiful, with its blooming jacarandas in intense purple, its streets full of life and movement. But I no longer felt like a spectator of other people's lives. I felt like someone who was about to reclaim her place in the world. Claire lived in a small but cozy house in a neighborhood close to downtown, full of plants, books, and photographs of her daughters and grandchildren. When she saw me, she hugged me with a strength that made me sway, and for the first time in months, I felt someone was genuinely glad to see me. "You look terrible, sister. Thin, dark circles, like you haven't slept in weeks." "Because I haven't slept. I haven't eaten well. I haven't lived, Claire. I've barely survived." She prepared me a full breakfast: ranchero eggs, beans, hot tortillas, coffee with milk, fresh fruit. While I ate, she pulled out a folder full of documents. "Eleanor, I worked as an accountant for 30 years. I've seen everything: husbands who hide money, children who steal from their parents, families that are torn apart by inheritances. But I've also learned that information is power, and that there is always, always a way to fight back when someone tries to screw you over." Her direct language surprised me but also gave me strength. Claire had survived her own difficult divorce, had raised her daughters alone, had built an independent and dignified life. If she could do it, I could too. "We need to get copies of all the documents you signed, all the bank movements, all the transfers. We need a complete timeline of when Robert started moving the money and where he moved it. And we need to do it before your children manage to have you declared incompetent." "But how? I don't have money for lawyers. I don't have access to the accounts. I have a friend who works at the bank where you and Robert had your main accounts. Her name is Brenda, and she hates men who scam their wives because the same thing happened to her 10 years ago. If we ask for her help, I'm sure she can find a way to get the information we need." For the first time in months, I felt hope. Not the blind, desperate hope that everything was a misunderstanding that could be fixed with love and understanding, but the concrete hope of someone who has a plan and the resources to execute it. And after that, what? Even if we get proof that Robert stole from me, even if we prove my children are lying, what can I do alone against all of them? Claire smiled for the first time since I had arrived, and her smile had something fierce, something that reminded me of our mother when she got really angry. Sister, you won't be alone. And they're not as smart as they think. Men like Robert always make mistakes because their arrogance makes them careless. And ungrateful children like yours always leave traces of their betrayals because they think their parents are too dumb to discover them. That afternoon, Claire took me to meet Brenda at a coffee shop near the bank. She was a woman in her 40s, elegant, but with that hardness in her eyes that comes from having been betrayed and surviving to tell the tale. When Claire explained my situation, Brenda nodded with the expression of someone who had heard the same story too many times. The pattern is always the same, she said, stirring her coffee with precise movements. First, they move the money little by little so it's not noticeable. Then they drain the accounts right before leaving. They always use the children as accomplices, convincing them the mother is crazy or a nuisance. And they always leave evidence because they think no one will investigate them. Can you help me get the records? Brenda looked me directly in the eyes, evaluating me as if trying to decide if I had the necessary strength to use the information she could provide. I can get the records, but you have to promise me something. If I give you this information, you're not going to use it to cry or to lament. You're going to use it to fight. Are you prepared to fight, Eleanor? The question resonated in my head like a bell toll. Was I prepared to fight? For 64 years, I had avoided conflict. I had given in during arguments. I had chosen peace over justice, harmony over my own dignity. I had been the perfect wife, the sacrificing mother, the woman who never made trouble. But that woman had died the moment my own children told me I was a burden that needed to be efficiently managed. Yes, I told Brenda, and my voice was firmer than it had been in years. I am prepared to fight. That night, I returned to my empty house, but it no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a headquarters. Claire had insisted I stay at her place, but I needed to be on my own turf. I needed to think clearly. I needed to prepare for the war I was about to declare. I poured myself a glass of water and took my medication. But this time, I didn't do it with the resignation of someone caring for a body no longer worth saving. I did it with the determination of someone who needed to be strong for the battle ahead. For the first time since Robert left, I slept soundly. I didn't dream of him. I didn't dream of my children. I didn't dream of the life I had lost. I dreamed of the woman I was about to become, someone who no longer asked permission to exist. Someone who no longer accepted crumbs disguised as love. Someone who had discovered that respect is not begged for, it is earned. And when I woke up the next day, the first thing I did was call Browning, Carmichael and Associates to inform them that I would not accept any out-of-court settlement proposal. If Robert and my children wanted a legal war, they were going to get one. But this time, I would have weapons too. Brenda fulfilled her promise a week later. She met me at the same coffee shop, but this time she carried a thick folder full of documents that would change everything. Her eyes shone with the satisfaction of catching a predator in the act. "Eleanor, your husband is more of an idiot than I thought," Brenda said, opening the folder on the table. "Not only did he leave a paper trail that leads directly back to him, but he committed several financial felonies that can land him in jail." The documents spread out before me were copies of transfers, withdrawals, investments, and movements I had never authorized. But the most shocking thing was seeing the full timeline. Robert had started stealing from me almost 2 years ago, long before I even suspected anything was wrong. "Look at this," Brenda pointed to a series of transfers. "In January last year, your husband opened an account at a small community bank in Tiffany Miller's name. He used your personal information as a reference, forged your signature on several documents, and transferred money from your personal accounts to that new one. That's called bank fraud and identity theft. He forged my signature? The copies are here. It's a pretty clumsy forgery, honestly. Any handwriting expert can prove it's not your writing. Your husband apparently believed you would never review these documents. Every page we reviewed was a new stab, but also new ammunition for the war I had decided to fight. Robert hadn't just abandoned me. He had been systematically stealing from me for 2 years, using my identity to commit crimes that, if discovered, could have put me in jail. And this is the best part. Brenda smiled with genuine malice. Remember how your children signed declarations saying you're mentally incapacitated? Well, it turns out David has also been moving money from the family accounts. Apparently, your eldest son authorized several transfers using a power of attorney your husband gave him 6 months ago. David stole from me too? Not only that, he invested that money in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies through his investment firm. If those investments went bad, he lost nothing because it wasn't his money. If they went well, he kept the profits. It's a classic case of family financial misappropriation. My eldest son, the child I had carried in my arms all night when he had colic, the teenager I had defended when he failed math, the young man I had financially supported during his early years as a stockbroker, had been robbing me while pretending to worry about my mental well-being. Brenda, is this enough to legally destroy them? Yes. To send them to jail? Also, yes. To recover your money? That depends on how fast we act. That afternoon, Claire accompanied me to the office of a lawyer Brenda had recommended. He wasn't one of those elegant firms in the financial district where fees cost a fortune. He was an older man, Mr. Harrison, who worked from a modest office in a downtown side street, but had 40 years of experience fighting against scammers and abusers. Mrs. Robbins, he said after reviewing all the documents, I have good news and bad news. The bad news, your family has betrayed you in a way I've rarely seen in 4 decades of practicing law. The good news, they are so arrogant they made mistakes that will allow us not only to recover your money, but also to send several of them to jail. Mr. Harrison had that calm way of speaking that inspired confidence, as if he had seen so many family betrayals that nothing surprised him anymore, but also as if each case still personally hurt him. The first thing we'll do is file a criminal complaint for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. The second is to request an immediate freeze on all accounts where your husband and son have been storing the stolen money. And the third is to countersue for emotional distress and economic damages. How much will all this cost? Ma'am, I'm going to be honest with you. Normally, a case like this would cost more money than you have, but there's something about your story that reminds me of my own mother, who was similarly defrauded by my father 30 years ago. We'll work on a contingency fee arrangement. If we recover your money, I take a percentage. If we recover nothing, you don't owe me a dime. For the first time in months, I had the sensation that the universe was beginning to balance the scales. It wasn't divine justice. It was human justice. Imperfect, but real. Built by people who had decided that some betrayals could not go unpunished. 3 days later, when Robert received the first legal notification, his reaction was exactly what we had expected. He called me screaming like a man caught red-handed. Eleanor! What the hell are you doing? Drop that complaint immediately or you'll regret it for the rest of your life. His voice had lost that calculated coldness with which he had abandoned me. Now he sounded desperate, furious, like a child caught in a prank who couldn't believe there were consequences for his actions. Robert, for 32 years I obeyed you in everything. Now you're going to be the one to obey the judge. You're crazy. The kids were right. You need psychiatric help. Nobody will believe you. The documents speak for themselves, Robert. You forged my signature. You stole my money. You used my identity to commit felonies. It's no longer about whether people believe me or not. It's about evidence. I hung up the phone and stood there trembling, not from fear but from an emotion I had never felt before. The power of having the truth on my side and the resources to prove it. That same afternoon, David showed up at my house unannounced. He walked in using his key, as if he still had the right to do so, and found me sitting in the living room reading a book. The first book I had been able to concentrate on reading in months, because my mind was finally at peace. Mom, what are you doing? Why are you attacking Dad? Why are you destroying the family? David, the family was destroyed when your father decided to rob and abandon me, and it was finished off when you all decided to help him. Mom, Dad didn't rob you. That money was his too. He had the right to use it. Was forging my signature his right too? Was using my identity to open accounts I didn't authorize his right to? I saw the exact moment David realized I knew more than he had calculated. His expression changed from indignation to fear. And for the first time in years, he was the one who didn't know what to say. Mom, if you go through with this, you're going to destroy our future. Financial investigations can hurt my career, my investment license. Your career is going to be hurt because you participated in the theft, not because I reported it. I didn't participate in any theft. I just helped Dad with some transfers, using a forged power of attorney to move money that wasn't yours into investments you were going to benefit from. That's called embezzlement, David. My son sat on the floor, literally, as if his legs could no longer support the weight of the consequences of his actions. All his life, he had been the golden boy, the successful one, the one who managed millions of dollars for others and felt powerful and untouchable. Mom, we can fix this. I can give the money back. Dad can return what he took. We can reach a family agreement without involving the courts. David, a month ago you were threatening to declare me mentally ill and institutionalize me. A week ago you told me Dad had the right to sue me for defamation. Now you want to reach a family agreement? It's just, we didn't know you would, that you could, that I could defend myself, that I could discover the truth, that I could fight. David fell silent, and in that silence, I understood something fundamental. My children had never respected me because I had never given them a reason to respect me. All their lives, I had been the mother who conceded, who forgave, who sacrificed her own rights to maintain family peace. They had grown up believing I was weak, manipulable, that they could dispose of me like an old piece of furniture that could be given away or thrown out without consequences. But that woman was dead. The woman sitting across from David was someone new, someone who had learned that love is not begged for and respect is not given away. David, for 26 years I was your mother. Now you're going to find out what it feels like to have the woman who knows you better than anyone in the world as your enemy. He left without a word, slamming the door harder than necessary, like a child throwing a tantrum. But I was no longer the mother who would run after him to console him and apologize for having made him angry. That night, Claire came over for dinner. We had bought ingredients to make my grandmother's chicken pot pies, and as we cooked together, just like when we were girls, she told me Brenda had found additional information. It turns out Tiffany also has a record. Before your husband, she defrauded 2 other older men in the same way. There are archived complaints in Florida and Nevada. She's a professional romantic scammer. A professional? She dedicates herself to seducing older men with money, convincing them their wives don't understand them, and then disappearing with their savings. Your husband isn't her first client, nor will he be her last. The information hurt, but it also reassured me. I hadn't lost Robert because I was insufficient as a woman or a wife. I had lost him because he was a vain, stupid man who had fallen into the network of a professional con artist who had identified his weaknesses and systematically exploited them. Claire, do you think I'll be able to recover my money? Sister, I think you're going to recover more than your money. You're going to recover your dignity, your self-respect, and the certainty that no one, ever again, will be able to walk all over you. That night, before sleeping, I looked at myself again in the cracked foyer mirror. The woman who looked back was no longer the one who had cried there just a few weeks ago. She had the same age, the same wrinkles, the same gray hair, but there was something different in her eyes. There was fire. There was determination. There was the calmness that comes from knowing you are finally fighting for something worthwhile. 6 months after filing the complaints, my life had changed in ways I never imagined possible. The legal process took its course with the relentless precision of justice when all the cards are finally on the table. Robert, David, and Tiffany were arrested in a coordinated operation that Brenda had organized with the federal banking authorities. Seeing the photographs in the local Dallas newspaper gave me a satisfaction I didn't know I was capable of feeling. The judge had frozen all their accounts and ordered the full return of the stolen money, plus interest and punitive damages. The final amount exceeded $950,000, a fortune that ironically made me the most financially solvent woman I had been in my entire life. But the money, while important, wasn't what had transformed me most. I moved out of the house in Lakeside Manor, not because I was forced to, but because I no longer wanted to live in the place where I had been humiliated for so many years. Claire helped me find a lovely apartment in the historic district of downtown Fort Worth, in a restored building with a view of the old Tarrant County Courthouse. It was smaller than the house, but it had something my previous home never had. It was completely mine. I chose every piece of furniture. I decided on every wall color. I bought every plant on the small balcony because I liked it, not because it complemented the decor someone else had imposed. For the first time in 65 years, I lived in a space that reflected my tastes, my decisions, my personality. Allison and Chloe had tried to contact me several times during the legal process. Their calls had evolved from indignation. "How could you put Dad and David in jail?" to pleading, "Mom, please, we're family, we have to stick together." And finally to emotional blackmail. "Your grandkids miss you. Don't you care about their suffering?" But I was no longer the woman who crumbled when someone tried to manipulate her with guilt. I had learned a fundamental lesson. You can't force anyone to love you, but you also don't have to beg for love from those who have shown they don't feel it. One October afternoon, while drinking coffee on my balcony watching tourists walk the cobblestone streets of the historic center, my doorbell rang. It was Chloe, thinner than I remembered, with deep circles under her eyes and the expression of someone who has lost something they thought would always be there. "Mom, we need to talk." I let her in, but not with the effusiveness of before. I didn't run to hug her. I didn't immediately offer her something to drink. I didn't dissolve into questions about her life. I simply let her in and waited for her to say what she had come to say. "Mom, I know we made mistakes. I know we hurt you. But Dad is in jail. David lost his license and might go to prison too. The family is destroyed. Chloe, the family was destroyed when you all decided to betray me. I didn't destroy anything. I simply stopped protecting you all from the consequences of your decisions. But we're your family. We're your children. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It means I love you. I will always love you. But loving doesn't mean allowing myself to be walked all over, to be stolen from, to be treated like garbage." Chloe sat on my new sofa, a comfortable turquoise blue piece I had chosen because it reminded me of the ocean I had never been able to visit during my marriage. I watched her observe my apartment with curiosity, as if she couldn't understand how her mother had been capable of creating such a beautiful, personal space. "You look different, Mom." "I feel different." It was true. I had started taking care of myself in ways I never had during the marriage. I had gotten my hair cut at a nice salon. I had bought clothes I liked instead of practical cheap ones. I had started wearing subtle makeup that enhanced my features instead of hiding them. It wasn't vanity. It was self-love. "Mom, could you consider dropping the charges against Dad and David? They're willing to return all the money, sign any document, do whatever it takes. But jail, that's going to ruin their lives forever." "Chloe, their lives are going to be ruined because they chose to be thieves and fraudsters, not because I reported them. If they didn't want to go to jail, they shouldn't have committed felonies. But they are your husband and your son. My ex-husband and my adult son who decided to systematically rob me for 2 years. The family bond doesn't exempt them from facing the consequences of their criminal actions." Chloe started to cry, but they were no longer tears that moved me to my core as before. I could see her pain, I could recognize that it was real, but I could also see that it wasn't pain over having hurt me. It was pain over the consequences she was now facing. "Mom, my kids ask about their grandpa. I don't know how to explain to them that their grandmother put their grandfather in jail. You can explain to them that their grandfather is in jail because he stole money, and that people who steal money go to jail. It's an important lesson for them to learn from a young age. Do you not love us anymore? Do we not matter to you at all?" The question hurt me, but not in the devastating way it would have months ago. It was a clean pain, the pain of someone who has accepted a difficult but necessary truth. "I love you deeply, but I've learned that loving doesn't mean allowing myself to be abused. I've learned that being a mother doesn't mean being a martyr, and I've learned that respect is not given away. It is earned." Chloe left that afternoon without getting what she had come for. She didn't plead anymore. She didn't try to emotionally blackmail me again. I think she finally understood that the woman she was talking to was no longer the manipulable mother she had known all her life. That night, Claire came over for dinner, as she did every Friday. I had established new routines, personal traditions that gave me structure and joy. On Fridays, I had dinner with Claire. On Saturdays, I went to the local farmer's market to buy flowers for my apartment. On Sundays, I took painting classes at the local art center. How did it go with Chloe? she asked, while we prepared our grandmother's chicken pot pies, a recipe we had learned together. As I expected. She came to ask me to drop the charges. And I explained that wasn't going to happen, that actions have consequences and it's time for my family to learn that lesson. Claire smiled while cutting the vegetables for the filling. It was a smile of pride, the smile of someone who had seen her sister transform from victim to survivor. Eleanor, do you regret anything? The question made me pause. Did I regret having destroyed my family? Did I regret having sent the father of my children to jail? Did I regret having chosen justice over family peace? I regret waiting so long to defend myself. I regret raising children who believed they could treat me like garbage. I regret being so blind, so submissive, so willing to sacrifice my dignity to keep together a family that never really respected me. But do you regret reporting them? No. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most right. After dinner, we sat on the balcony watching the illuminated city. Fort Worth stretched out before us like a sea of lights, full of life, possibilities, and future. For the first time in years, I also felt full of future. Claire, do you think I'm a bad mother for doing this? Sister, I think you finally became a good mother. You taught your children that actions have consequences, that respect is non-negotiable, and that no one, not even family, has the right to trample your dignity. It's the most important lesson you could give them. A month later, I received a letter from David from prison. It was the first direct communication I had with him since the day of the trial, when he had been sentenced to 3 years for embezzlement and bank fraud. The letter was brief, written in the handwriting I had known since he learned to write in elementary school. Mom, I've had a lot of time to think. At first I hated you for putting me here, but after months of being locked up, I finally understand that I put myself here with my decisions. I never truly apologized. I never acknowledged that what we did was wrong. We robbed you, we lied to you, we betrayed you, and then we tried to make you believe you were the one to blame. I know you may never forgive me, and I understand if that's the case, but I want you to know that for the first time in my life, I respect the woman who gave me life. It took me 36 years to understand who you truly are. I read the letter several times, sitting on my balcony with a cup of coffee that was cooling in my hands. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the urge to rush to the correctional facility to visit him. But I did feel something close to hope, the possibility that my children, finally, had learned something from all this. That afternoon, I went to the jeweler where years ago I had sold my mother's ring to pay family expenses. The jeweler, an older gentleman who remembered me, was surprised to see me arrive with so much money to recover the piece. Mrs. Robbins, it's good to see you. You look wonderful, very refreshed. I put on my mother's ring for the first time in 3 years. It was a simple gold band with a small emerald that she had worn all her life. As I slid it onto my finger, I felt as if I were reconnecting with a version of myself I had lost long ago. The woman who had the right to keep the things she loved, who didn't have to sacrifice her personal treasures to keep happy people who didn't value her. That night, for the first time in decades, I poured myself a glass of expensive red wine and toasted alone on my balcony, while the bells of the courthouse chimed 10 o'clock. I toasted the woman I had been, for all I had suffered, for all I had learned. But above all, I toasted the woman I had become, someone who finally knew she deserved love, respect, and a life lived on her own terms. 2 years had passed since that morning when my car broke down on the highway, and I returned home to discover my life had been emptied by the people I loved most. This morning, as I prepared coffee in my small but bright kitchen in the historic district, I heard the familiar sound of the courthouse bells chiming 7, and I realized something extraordinary. I was completely happy. Not the frantic artificial happiness I had faked for 32 years of marriage, that performative joy displayed on social media and at family gatherings to show that everything is fine when nothing is fine. It was a deep, serene happiness, built on the solid foundation of self-respect and authenticity. It was the happiness of someone who is finally living her own life, instead of living the life others expect of her. My apartment had become a personal sanctuary. The walls were filled with the paintings I had created in my classes at the Art Center, Texas landscapes, portraits of older women with serene expressions, Still lifes that captured the beauty of simple objects illuminated by the golden Dallas light. I had discovered I had a talent for painting, a gift that had lain dormant for decades because I never had the time or permission to explore it. On the dining room table, which I had chosen for its light wood and simple lines, I had spread out the plans for my most recent project, a foundation for older women victims of economic abuse and family abandonment. With the money recovered from Robert and David's fraud, plus smart investments I had made with the help of a financial advisor, I had enough resources to create something that could help other women who had gone through similar betrayals. The foundation would be called New Hope Foundation and would offer free legal aid, psychological support, and job training programs for women who, like me, had discovered late in life that they needed to rebuild their existence from scratch. Brenda had agreed to head the legal department, and Claire would manage the accounting. We were going to open the doors in 6 months in a restored building 3 blocks from my apartment. The doorbell rang as I reviewed the final architectural details. It was the mail carrier, bringing me a certified letter I recognized immediately. It came from the federal correctional facility where David was serving his sentence. Over the past 2 years, I had received regular letters from him, each showing gradual progress in his understanding of what he had done and why it had been wrong. This letter was different. The envelope was unusually thick, as if it contained more than a simple letter. When I opened it, I found 3 handwritten pages and something wrapped in tissue paper. Mom, I get out of here in 2 weeks. I've served my full sentence, without reductions for good behavior, because I wanted to be sure I had completely learned the lesson I needed to learn. During these years, I've thought a lot about the man I was before I came here, and I'm ashamed to admit that I was someone who didn't deserve your respect or love. I learned to steal from you because I grew up seeing that you always yielded, that you always forgave, that you always put the needs of others before your own. I thought that made you weak, that I could take advantage of you without consequences. I was completely wrong. Your capacity for sacrifice wasn't weakness. It was strength. And when you finally decided to defend yourself, that strength became something that taught me the most important lesson of my life. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to welcome me into your new life. I know I've lost the right to call myself your son because of my actions. But I want you to know that the woman who set boundaries for me, who made me face the consequences of my actions, who chose justice over family comfort, is the mother I needed to have all along. She is the mother I admire and respect more than anyone else in this world. The wrapped object was your engagement ring. I had kept it when Dad emptied the house, thinking I might sell it someday. But now I understand it wasn't mine to take. It belongs to you, just like all the dignity you finally reclaimed. I unwrapped the tissue paper with hands that trembled slightly. It was my original engagement ring, the simple gold band Robert had placed on my finger 33 years ago, when we were both young and poor and believed that love was enough to build a life together. I looked at it in the morning light streaming through my apartment windows, and I realized something astonishing. It no longer hurt to look at it. I felt no nostalgia for the woman I had been when I first wore it. I felt no sorrow for the marriage that had ended in betrayal and abandonment. I felt nothing but a deep tranquility, the peace of someone who has completely closed a chapter of her life and is ready to write the next ones. I put the ring in a small wooden box where I kept other memories of the past, photographs of my parents, letters from my daughters when they were small treasures from a life that had been real and meaningful despite having ended in pain. They weren't painful relics. They were evidence that I had lived, I had loved, I had built beautiful things even when they hadn't been preserved forever. That afternoon, I had an appointment with Chloe. We had established a monthly ritual. We met at a downtown coffee shop to talk. They weren't emotional encounters or dramatic reconciliations. They were careful conversations between 2 adult women who were learning to know each other again after one of them had fundamentally changed. Chloe had changed too. The legal process, the family scandal, the reality of having a father in prison had been experiences that forced her to reflect on her own values and decisions. She was no longer the superficial, materialistic woman who had chosen her father's money over her mother's dignity. She was someone more thoughtful, more humble, more conscious of the consequences of her actions. "Mom, "How is the foundation project coming along?" she asked while stirring her coffee, a nervous gesture she had inherited from me. "We open in 4 months. We already have the first group of women who will receive help. 8 ladies who have been through situations similar to mine. Can I do something to help? Not money. I know you don't need my money. But maybe volunteer work or..." "Chloe, volunteering at a foundation requires real commitment, not symbolic gestures to clear your conscience. If you want to help, you have to be prepared to hear difficult stories, to see up close what family betrayal does to older women, to face the reality that what happened to me happens to thousands of women every day. I'm prepared, Mom. I've been going to therapy for 2 years. I've been learning about myself, about the decisions I made, about why I chose to betray you when you needed me most. And what have you learned? That I grew up believing money was more important than integrity. That I learned to see your kindness as weakness instead of seeing it as strength. That I participated in something terrible because it was easier than admitting Dad was wrong. It was progress. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. It wasn't a return to the mother-daughter relationship we had before. But it was something real and honest. Chloe had started doing the difficult work of understanding who she had been and who she wanted to become. "You can start by helping with document organization on Saturdays," I told her. "But you have to understand that this isn't a way to earn my forgiveness. My forgiveness can't be earned. It can be deserved, and that will take time." I walked home that afternoon through the historic downtown streets, stopping at the local farmer's market to buy fresh flowers, as I did every Saturday. The vendors already knew me, greeted me by name, and saved the best roses when they knew I was coming by. I had a small but real community of people who knew me as Eleanor, not as someone's wife or someone's mother, but as myself. At home, as I arranged the flowers in vases I had carefully chosen for their simple beauty, I reflected on the 2 years that had passed since my life completely fell apart. It had been the hardest period of my existence, but also the most transformative. I had lost my husband. I had lost the version of my children I thought I knew. I had lost the security of a predictable and stable life, but I had gained something infinitely more valuable. I had gained myself. I had discovered that I was capable of defending myself, of making difficult decisions, of living alone without feeling incomplete. I had learned that self-respect is not optional, that dignity is non-negotiable, and that it is never too late to start living authentically. That night, as I had dinner on my balcony watching the city lights, I thought of all the women who at that very moment were living what I had lived, betrayed by those they loved most, doubting their own perception of reality, feeling alone and defeated. I wanted them to know what I had learned, that the end of one life can be the beginning of a better life, that betrayal can be the catalyst for discovering a strength you didn't know you had. I poured myself a glass of red wine, the same ritual I had established to celebrate my new life, and toasted all the women who were still at the darkest point of their journey, not knowing that on the other side of so much pain awaited a version of themselves stronger, wiser, and freer than they had ever imagined possible. As I lowered the glass from my lips, I whispered a question into the night air of Dallas. Have you ever lived through a family betrayal like this? Do you know someone who has gone through something similar? Because if there's one thing I've learned in these 2 years, it's that no woman should go through what I went through alone. That we all deserve to know that it is possible to rebuild a life after everything collapses. That it is possible to find happiness after the deepest betrayal. That it is never too late to start respecting oneself. Tell me in the comments if this story has touched you in any way, if it has inspired you, helped you reflect, or if you know someone who needs to hear this message of hope and rebirth. And if this story has reached your heart, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so that this message reaches someone else who needs to know that it is possible to find the light after the deepest darkness. That always, always, it is possible to start anew.